Okay, thank you everybody. Good evening, good evening. So, first of all, thank you very much for coming. It's beautiful weather outside, but you're still here. You want to learn and you want to meet other people, other growth hackers, other founders. So, I think it's a really good attitude that you have. So, perfect. Thank you for you to come here. So, I will present a little bit, like 2 minutes, the meetup. Also, Growth Tribe. It's new. Growth Tribe is a growth hacking agency from David Arnox, myself, Peter. Jeroen Jepkema and Kees van Nuenen, and we are building up a growth hacking academy and also a growth hacking consultancy for startups, corporates, and VC. So that's Growth Tribe. We are recording now and live stream it because Ruben Nieuwenhuis is also here from Startup Amsterdam, and Startup Amsterdam is a new initiative from the city of Amsterdam to support the ecosystem. So we want to record this so that people can watch it later on the meetup. Can learn from it as well, who could not be here. So we have two. So the first thing is the hashtag for tonight, tribe events. So if you tweet and you have the best tweet, you can win a small, cute cactus. Yeah. So we have two. So one for the best tweet. Probably we're going to have a look at how many retweets or favorites, and the second one is the best tweet with the best picture. Yeah, so including the hashtag tribe events. Secondly, the agenda. So my name is Peter, so we have done this. And then Jon will start about like sales hacks, 17 sales hacks. After that, a small Q&A with Jon. After that, we have Robin Wouters, the founding editor from Tech EU in Amsterdam. We did 18 interviews in the last 3 days. And he's going to write a big article about the tech Dutch startup ecosystem. So he will do a half-an-hour presentation with questions how to maximize your chance of getting press coverage as a startup, which is, I think, really interesting for startups and also important. Also, next week we have another event, Growth Tribe. It is sold out for the startup tickets already. If you really want to come, you still can send me an email. No promises, but you could try. But we will live stream the evening program for startups also. So that will be on Startup Juncture. So you will probably get an email also. The good news is on the 15th of June we have another growth hacking event that we sponsor and partner with Patrick and Chasey. They wrote the book The Lean Startup Entrepreneurship. It's a full day workshop, full stack marketing and growth hacking. So highly recommended to go here. It's 15th of June. So I just want to show it. And then, yeah, Jon, maybe it's time for your presentation, I think.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Thank you, Usabilla, for having us. The office looks awesome, actually. So I'm super happy to be here. My name is Jon Woodroof. It's fun to see so many familiar faces. September will be 2 years that I've been in Amsterdam. I used to work down the street actually with Firo and Ave out at Springest here, and I've gotten to know quite a few people in the crowd, so thank you for coming out. I'll start with this fun Venn diagram that I made to kind of introduce myself and what I do. Sales-wise, I'd say I started a long time ago, maybe when I waited tables. I worked at a bunch of brunch places in Atlanta. Also had my own bike shop in Atlanta. I did sales for translation, for Ruby on Rails consulting, iOS and Android consulting. Ultimately also at Springest, and since November I've had my own BV here, kind of blending these kind of three spheres. The tech and startup scene, which most of you know me from, I work with a company called Proto that does custom app development. In the cycling industry, going back to my roots from having my own bike shop, I do PR for a company called True Communications, and I've started doing some events with Peter and the Growth Tribe guys, and where those things overlap is like I do a 6 a.m. ride on Fridays called Roll Call, inspired by a ride in San Francisco. The Sales Hacker series that some of you guys have been to blurs the line between the events and the tech and startup scene, and Rie is a Dutch frame builder. It's like 100 years old, actually. I'm helping them to get people stoked about custom handmade frames from Amsterdam. So that's a little bit about myself and kind of help you visualize the kind of different spheres that I work in. So I'll kind of just dive right into it. Everybody's heard always be closing, coffees for closers, kind of mantra. I think that in sales, whether you're like the dedicated salesperson or within a team of salespeople, you're in charge of getting new business for your company. You've got your head down like everyone does for their job and just trying to do the thing that you think works. But what I've found is a lot of salespeople, even within an organization, they don't necessarily share knowledge about what works or what doesn't work, and kind of lose the idea of like always learning or iterating on their approach to it. And I would always see coworkers of mine in the different jobs that I've had, particularly software developers, go to meetups and talks and conferences and learn new things, and salespeople kind of missed out on that. So that's where the idea of Sales Hackers came from in Sales for Startups, some of the things I've done here, and led to the opportunity to share some stuff with you guys tonight. So I'll start with this one. This is kind of classic for me. Like, you need a map to know where you're going. Here's kind of a classic looking map. I love these. And the idea is to share with yourself and your organization what are the steps to you closing a deal. Like, you have to know that. And it seems kind of intuitive, like, but what are the actual incremental steps from meeting someone to them signing the contract? You know, is there in a conversation? Do they send you more information? Do you have a ballpark? Is there like a more detailed contract? Do they have to install software? Like, what is all of that? And ultimately, if you make it very clear to them, this may be a lot to paste into one email, but maybe you convey what the next step is, or you paste some of these. And what I've found, you know, as the first hack, is if I'm sending an email, we're a few emails in the correspondence, we've met, we've had coffee, they're interested, we've done the first questions at the top, and it's the ball's in our court now to send them a proposal. They know that on April 16th, we're going to have a proposal to them. And then the next step for them is to say, hey, we're in the ballpark or not. So a lot of times you think it's assumed or it's understood, but really laying this out helps you tell your team where an opportunity is in the sales process. But also for a lead, it's kind of comforting to just show them what the next step is. And you know, on a bigger scale, if you're able to share something like this and just ask them where they are, like, you know, typically our customers follow this kind of process, like, where do you see yourself? And they're like, yeah, well, right now we're comparing like different proposals, and we have a board meeting, and we need to approve the budget for this. I'm like, cool, all right, well, what works best for you? When should I check back in? And they'll say in 2 weeks. Okay, cool. So you guys will approve the ballpark probably in like 2 weeks, and they put the date there and then set a reminder and follow up then. So this is kind of a pretty basic thing, but technically a hack. I'm assuming a lot of people here use Google Apps for your organization, maybe like show of hands using Google Apps. Yeah, maybe 30, 40%. If you're using Gmail for your job, this is in there. I don't know if people know about this. How many of you guys have used canned responses in Gmail? Boom, even less, but some. Nice work. I found this is what it says in Dutch. I recently made the leap and switched everything into Dutch. And email for lauwe mensen. And another thing I learned, lauwe versus like lauwe or whatever, it's the difference between like lazy and lukewarm, right? Depending on how you pronounce it, which could be the same person, actually. So anyway, this is if you go under settings and you go into labs, you can turn this on. And if you click down to the bottom right of the email, you can add these templates. And depending on if it's following up with someone, reaching out to someone for the first time, you can build a shitload of them and not retype it over and over again, which is huge for productivity and avoiding typos. Talking about budget, this is something that comes up a lot in the conversations I have with people talking about sales. And it's tricky because you want to cross this bridge pretty early on, because you may have a first conversation, a first phone call, you really like each other, like their company likes your company. But if you're not in the ballpark with budget, like, they're going to have a rude awakening when that does come up, and you're going to be really disappointed. So mentioning that, maybe in an email when they first reach out, maybe in a conversation, you know, typically our projects range anywhere from on the low end to here, and the medium, which is most common around here, and then in the high end, you know, a big project is for this. Like, where do you see yourself there? Like, well, you know, where do you see your project or the budget for, you know, doing this with us potentially? And they would say, oh yeah, well, probably a medium looks like good for us, because they want to kind of fit in there. But if they say that small is too big, then it's up to you to introduce them to someone that can help them. Maybe that's a freelancer, maybe that's another company. But if you're not in the ballpark, then, you know, maybe they will be in the future. Set another reminder, but you can add value just by introducing them to someone that can help. So this ties into the process that I showed you before, asking questions that help you compare apples to apples. Because like sometimes a company like wants to sell to, yeah, in Springist case, like it was tough. Like HR directors, like when I was working at Springist in the UK, was kind of my market. But I couldn't necessarily sell to like a 50-year-old HR director that's been there for 10 years because they don't want to rock the boat. It has to be someone that's like in their 30s or 40s. They're trying to modernize the organization, and you start to like drill down into the kind of person in a company and the kind of company that's a good fit. So for Proto, some of these towards the bottom, like how involved do you plan to be in the development process? If someone doesn't want to be involved, that's not a good fit for us. Maybe for other companies it is, if they just throw like a tech spec or whatever over the fence and we'll come back in 6 months with an app. For some companies that might be good, but for us, like we want them to be really closely involved and communicate along the way. So if they're like, yeah, I have no time, like, can you just do it? We're gonna be like, no, actually, maybe someone else can. So if you're able to ask consistent questions, maybe put these in your CRM or however you're tracking leads, and this helps you communicate to yourself and prioritize who you're spending time on for new business, but also to your team. Like this lead is really good because of the answers they gave us for these questions. So that helps you from wasting time on leads that aren't really worth it. This one's kind of fun for me. Anyone that knows me knows I use Instagram quite a bit, and for more than just like pictures of food and cats. This example was from a while ago, actually, when I first had moved to the Netherlands, probably the first year, and I got to go to a conference at the Felix Meritus on Keizersgracht, and this woman is a designer from New York. She was presenting these things that she put together, these Dia de los Muertos skulls. She had hoped to do a project with Scotch and Soda, and she knew she was back in Amsterdam. So she kind of asked the crowd, like, does anyone know someone at Scotch and Soda? And I didn't know anyone at Scotch and Soda. I just moved here. But I looked up at Scotch Amsterdam on there, did the hashtag for the conference, mentioned the speaker, and mentioned several friends of mine that I knew had something to do with the fashion scene a little bit in Amsterdam. And within a few minutes, there's not timestamps here, but 2 buddies of mine mentioned designers at Scotch and Soda. So before she was off the stage, I'd sent her the URL for this Instagram post and then introduced myself and told her I connected her with 2 designers on the Instagram post. So that's one kind of hack there. Like for me, Instagram has become almost as valuable as LinkedIn just for the networking that you can do on it. Plus the pictures look better. Here's another recent one. I was at Uprise Festival. A number of you guys were there as well. Same kind of thing. I was there on behalf of Proto, mentioned the hashtags, linked to Instagram. This one got 9 retweets and 14 favorites. Got 1 lead from it that we're still talking to. So again, I even mentioned, check it out, Usabilla's in there. You know, this isn't rocket science, but I think sometimes like salespeople think, oh, that's the marketing department. You know, like if a salesperson in a company is actually doing this themselves, like then they're building that relationship directly. So if you're mentioning people, then you can start that conversation, which leads into Twitter. Here's another springest example. This actually was really useful. I was able to book meetings in Birmingham and here in Amsterdam at the RAI for these 2 different conferences. And those links, we'll get to that in a second. Those link to a scheduling tool called Calendly. But the thing here, I guess this is kind of understood, but maybe not so much from a sales angle. Like here's something about our company, a little bit about the product, and depending on if you're going to this conference or this conference, if you click that link, it opens up my calendar. And if that looks interesting to you as an HR manager, you would click it. And I got like 2 meetings very quickly, I think maybe that same afternoon, which was crazy. So for leads, diving down the Twitter road a little bit more, this is, and I was just talking to David about this beforehand, if reaching out to people on Twitter, I found, has a higher response rate in a lot of cases than email. Like emails, like people are so blasted with emails. If emails are too long, they open it, they have to scroll it all, they close it. A tweet will pop up on their phone, like, ooh, someone tweeted at me. And if it looks interesting, in this case, there was a referral linked to the same scheduling app, and before I even had his email address or his number, we had scheduled a meeting. So just from a tweet that, of course, he saw very quickly. So for the sales stuff I do and the PR stuff, I use Twitter a lot in this way. Last Twitter example that I'll share, I got an introduction from this guy, Jason, who's the first guy I mentioned there. He introduced us to Whittle app. I have a meeting with him tomorrow. And I just thanked him on Twitter. It's something I could have done via email. I maybe could have called him. But like I mentioned him. Of course, he's always trying to get followers. He's a successful VC in the States. Whittle app loves to mention they're a new startup. And of course, is giving Proto some visibility. So all 3 people favorited it. I mean, it's just kind of a little hack to get people like a little flattered and kind of get on their radar. And this was before we even had the first conversation. So to kind of what you and I were talking about, David, before the conversation, like warming them up to when we do have the talk, like they've clicked around and they've seen some of this online already. Another tool I love to use, ultimately this is a paid service, but this part is free, so I just leave this running in Chrome all the time. Krijn Soteman was someone I was trying to meet with, but he's a contributor at tweakers.net, and I wanted him to talk about this product, the Recon Jet, and I was hoping to get a meeting with him at 5 p.m. on Thursday. So I tweeted at him, and he responded, and he said he was nearby, and boom, had a meeting. It was awesome, and I hadn't even sent him an email yet. And I didn't know him on LinkedIn, so when I highlight his name, if you have the Salesloft Prospector installed in Chrome, you can search for that person on LinkedIn. I use this all the time. If I'm on the phone with someone, they're like, oh yeah, that company, what's that guy's name? So-and-so, Joe Schmo. I'm like, oh, Joe Schmo. And I type it into my notes, but then I search for that person on LinkedIn, and I'm like, oh, Joe and I both know Susie or whatever. And they're like, oh yeah, do that all the time. And that's because I'm able to search for them super quickly just using this tool. And in this case, I knew his Twitter handle, but didn't know his LinkedIn. So yeah, this is the Prospector tool. Got ahead of myself. Ultimately, we use this for some time at Springist. It's kind of expensive. I think for building really good leads, if your team has the budget for it, it could be useful. But this tool, again, is free. Just that, like search for this person or company on LinkedIn. I do that all the time, see if I have a second-degree connection at a company, even if it's someone really low on the totem pole. If I know someone that knows someone there, I'll ask that person to introduce me before I try to email the CEO or the CTO or even call them or whatever. Try to get an introduction through the organization. So back to Krijn that we were talking about a moment ago. Ultimately, I sent Krijn a LinkedIn connection through LinkedIn. We had some secondary connections. We knew people in common, connected, and now when he writes a story or when he's mentioned in the news, depending on the person or their title, there's a service called Newslee. Have any of you guys heard of this one before? It's super good. So when someone is mentioned in a blog or newspaper, sometimes it's like a random like trade publication that no one outside of like fiberglass cable has ever heard of. Like when they get mentioned, it sends you an email of all the people in your network that have been mentioned in the news. In one case, my buddy worked at like Amazon or something. It was like some super nerdy conference, and he was interviewed on the trade show floor, and he was mentioned like in the news. And I sent him a note, and I was like, "Oh, look at this man! Like, that's so cool." And he's like, "Oh, I had no idea." Like he hadn't, and he's like, "I'm in the news." But I use this a ton. And another thing that I do, back to the Twitter hack before, if Krijn wrote an article about something else, it didn't even have to be what I got that meeting for, I would say, "Oh, cool, at blah product, blah company, whatever, nice article at Krijn Soteman." But I would schedule that as a tweet down the road, and then that would pop up, and maybe that brand or the editor or person, depending on who the lead is, would hopefully favorite or see the tweet. So Newslee is useful for that. Rapportive, this is probably something a lot of you guys have seen before too, hopefully. Yeah? Yes? Sweet. Actually, not that many. So let's say the tweet didn't work, or maybe I hadn't tried that yet, and I knew who the decision maker at that organization was. Maybe it's the CTO for software development or an HR director, and I want to figure out what their email address is. There's some other ways that if you catch with David afterwards, that make it a little more high-tech than this. This is a little lo-fi. This guy, Matthew Smith or something, he's like the main dude at WeWork. I just got some space at WeWork down the street, and he favored one of my tweets. I'm like, oh shit, this would be a good guy to connect with, right? So we had a second-degree connection. So I started typing his email. It has to be like Mike M. Matt M. Smith, and I typed in a few connections. Ultimately, it was MS at WeWork, and I could tell it was the right email address because it popped up on Rapportive. Sent him a note, mentioned a secondary connection, just moved in at WeWork here in Amsterdam. It's awesome. Boom, send the invitation. So that's just a connection to build from someone that favorited a tweet of mine that ultimately could lead to an introduction down the road. But for any number of reasons, it might be useful to figure out what someone's email address is, and Rapportive is a great way to do that. Uh-oh. Oops, we skipped 10. Where's Peter? How am I doing on time, by the way? Boom. Okay, so keep it real. Make emails personable. This kind of comes from something that's hard for salespeople, like empathy, putting yourself in someone else's shoes, but also kind of asking them to put themselves in your shoes too. So I know you can't read this, so I mean, I think you get the slides afterwards, right? But like I wrote to ask you 2 things. If you were me, who at Digitus would be best to speak with? 2, if you think it could be helpful, may I ask you to make an introduction? Just like, boom, cut and dry. This top part is me like emailing the dude, and then here's the text that he can introduce me with. And I'm like, I wrote to work with you because I work at Springest here in Amsterdam. We're an independent comparison website for training programs and courses with a bespoke corporate offering, maximizing employee development and minimizing HR headaches. Link, boom. So if an HR director reads that and they think, oh, this might be interesting, and they get this introduction from this guy Mark that they know, at least gets me in the door. But asking them, if you were me, who would be best to speak with? And if you think it could be helpful. So if they're like, yeah, I don't think it's going to be helpful, sorry, they'll at least let you know. And it's not a yes or no question, but just asking them, hey, if you were me, if you think this would be helpful. Yeah? Yeah, of course. No, go ahead.
Do you have like some sort of conversion rate on that type of email? You send 100 out, 10% of the time you get a positive response, or what should we expect like as a benchmark?
No, I think that's a great question. I think because I've been doing that so long, and
Yeah, what's
oh
the
yeah.
benchmark on like response rate for this type of cold email?
So he's saying, if you send someone, it's like, hey, do you think this would be interesting for your company versus, hey, if you were me and you think it might be helpful. I haven't really done it the other way in so long. I do have some stats to share actually later from an email tool that I use, which might give you some insight there. But like A and B testing, some of the stuff I've done is like mentioning someone's first name in the subject line versus like some other kind of catchy subject line. And the first name works really well in the States and in the Netherlands, but in Germany it doesn't. They don't want to see their first name in the subject line of an email. So this part is important, actually, setting reminders. This tool is called Write Inbox. I would say 70% of the emails that I send, I set a reminder. Because one thing that salespeople are bad about, they're shooting from the hip, they're like, bah, 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 I'm going to meet with this guy, email this guy, and tweet at them, whatever. But unless you're really diligent about using your CRM or a tool within Gmail, within Chrome, you're going to forget about that. You're sending so many emails. How will you be sure in a week or 2 weeks, especially if you said you'll call them in 2 weeks, or they say, hey, call me in 2 weeks when I'm back from vacation? I use Write Inbox for that all the time. And in some cases, even if I didn't say I'll be back in touch, or they didn't suggest I get back in touch, if it's really cold or like the deal didn't even go through, I'll set it for 3 months or 6 months, hell, sometimes in a year, and I'll still check back in with them. So constantly, every morning at 8 a.m., this email, no reply at Write Inbox, brings that email back to the top of my inbox, and I make sure to follow up with those people. So meeting scheduling, this part's really hard a lot of times, so I try to make it a little bit easier. This tool is called assistant.to. Has anyone heard of this one? I think these guys up front probably have. This also goes into Chrome. I think there's a picture of it here. It's right at the bottom of where you're composing an email. You see the email addresses up there. You said the duration, where the location would be, like they can call me or I can call them. Sometimes they say Skype. I'm Jon Woodroof on Skype. This thing pops up. It syncs with your calendar. So like these spots are when I thought it might be useful, like this afternoon, this morning, in the afternoon. And then it pastes it into an email. And if they click works for me, they get an invitation and I get an invitation. It's kind of awesome. And if they're in California and I don't even know what time it is there, they click view in your time zone and it shows where they are, whether it's like Pacific time or somewhere in, who knows, Asia, Australia. You have to like do the math, ask Google. It just, it clicks it and it's great because I think sometimes they'll even copy from there and then suggest the times in their time zone. And this makes it easy. And if they click the link, then you get invitations. The tool I mentioned earlier, Calendly, I'm from Atlanta. These guys are actually also from Atlanta, so a little bit of hometown affiliation there. Those links in that tweet that link to a scheduling tool, for me this is super useful. Like if I get people interested enough, maybe just to have a 15-minute call to see how and if we might be a fit to work together, I'll send them this link, like when works best for you, and it shows up kind of like this. And I can link specifically to a time or a certain week for a 15-minute call, Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon. If they want to talk then, yeah, there's 4 times available on Wednesday. If they click it, it goes through to a specific time. They click it, put their email address in. I get an invitation. They get an invitation. I know this is kind of stretching it a little bit. That it has to be so far along in the sales process where like it's clear they'd like to speak with you. Ideally, this would be like an inbound lead. It's hard to get someone cold to do this. So the first one works a little bit more in that case. But if someone wants to meet with you, this kind of puts the ball in their court. Like, hey, whenever works best for you, just pick a time here, and you can set the duration and customize it in a number of ways. So on the home stretch here, this actually stole from Springest as well. So many Springest shout-outs. Have you guys seen this before? It's really funny. So giving people an out, like when I'm following up the day before, I'm like, hey, is tomorrow at 11 still a good time for you? If it's like in the afternoon, in the morning, I'm like, I'm looking forward to catching up later today. Let me know if this is still a good time. And if they're super busy, maybe their kid is sick, any number of reasons, and they're able to say, actually, can we reschedule? That's super nice. They're going to like you a lot more than if they're stuck in a meeting and they're like, oh, man, I really need to get, you know, like they're not going to be listening and giving people an out. And then back to the other question, you know, if you or me, who is best at this organization to speak with, they're not going to get sucked into a meeting or a call with you. They're able to pass you along to someone that they think might be better to speak with. Some cases they might be giving you the runaround, but at least you're not sucking this person into a meeting, and at least you can try to get on their good side. Hey, look, it's you. And Peter. This is a tool I just started using recently. Found it kind of like hoping that it existed, kind of Googling and describing what I hope was real life, and it appeared. And this is me searching from within my network for growth hacking. 29 results came up. These are first-degree connections. Actually, my also former colleague Carmen, who I think might be here maybe she's late. She showed up in there. But this tool will export your LinkedIn connections, but in a better way than LinkedIn usually does. Like, I don't know if you've ever tried exporting your LinkedIn network. It just like dumps out all of them, but it doesn't have any location information, and it really isn't that good of a spreadsheet. This exports the location, their email address, the job title. You can segment it by location, because if I say first-degree connections just in the Netherlands, or first-degree connections just at this company, or companies over 500 employees, or whatever, when I export that list from LinkedIn, and you're able to really leverage your network in a way that otherwise really wasn't that useful, wasn't efficient with LinkedIn. So I found this is kind of helpful. So Cadence is another tool you and I talked about before. SalesLoft is the company that made this. We use this actually at Springest. I think one of these towards the bottom might have been a Springest one, but these are some of the ones where, like, I mentioned people's names in the subject line, and you know, out of 700 in that first blast, almost half of them opened it. In this case, for a really small one, quite a few opened it. Some of these were totally cold, and this was 37%. But I wasn't comparing it to like what I already thought wouldn't work necessarily. But Cadence is cool because you're able to upload, let's say, a list you made with the LinkedIn exporter. Maybe you made a list another way. You bought a list somewhere. You're able to upload the CSV into here, and it syncs with your Gmail. So you're not sending it from some transactional email service that might get caught in spam. It's sending it from your company account. It's not sent on behalf of blah, whatever. So for me, it's been pretty useful. Just click it once and then be able to follow up with that conversation directly in my inbox and not through some other tool. So ultimately, this is also a paid one. I think they want something like $40 a month. And if you're engaging like big lists of people for like outbound pushes, it might be useful. So this one comes up a lot. This is probably one of like the biggest things I suggest people just like have on the go, especially like hack-wise. Like at Uprise Festival, this was huge. Like, instead of worrying about having business cards, if you have your forwardable introduction on copy on your phone, and you're talking to someone and they're like, oh, it sounds interesting. Oh, I could introduce you to this other guy, or your company sounds really cool. Hey, cool. Can you just put your email address in my phone, and I'll send you an email. And you don't have to follow up the next day. You just click paste, and it pastes in your forwardable introduction, and then you can follow up with that later. You can even use Rapportive, and you can see their LinkedIn, their Twitter, whatever, and you're following up the next day. But also for the introductions I mentioned earlier, this makes it really easy for second-degree connections to introduce you in the right way to someone else. Because a warm introduction through someone is always going to get you further than just knocking on the door cold. And in my experience, for even the people I try to help connecting them, I ask them just to make one of these, and then I can introduce them to 6 or 7 or more people in my network in the span of like 30 seconds, and it's just makes it really easy. Sweet. So the last one is really cheesy, but keep trying. Because in sales, I think that's where a lot of people fall down. Like, you'll hear no a lot, and I think there's an inverse relationship. Like, 10% of deals are made on like the first call, but like 80% of them are made on like the 8th call or something like that, or the touch point. And whether that's a tweet or an email or a phone call or meeting face to face, it's going to take a lot of time to actually close the deal. So, none of these are like a cure-all, but ultimately to get there, you just have to keep trying. So the last thing I'll mention, the event that I also throw, the Sales Hacker Series here in Amsterdam. The next one's on the 28th. It'll be a double Dutch, and the theme will be hacking negotiations and objections. So if you're interested to learn more about this stuff, definitely put this down and check out Sales Hacker in May. Thank you. Thank you. Go for it.
What's your view on? I do a lot of list building and then cold emailing. Some people call it spamming. Recipients that spam. My results kind of suck. So I get like maybe 20% open rate, maybe like 1% reply rate, something like that. Have you ever done that? Is there any way to increase those numbers, or what's your view on like cold emailing?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like a part of the game, especially if you're just trying to. Oh, yeah. So he's asking about cold emailing, building lists, people you've never talked to before, they've never heard of you before. It's just a variation on cold calling, which is, a lot of times pretty brutal. And cold emailing can be too, because you're not going to get that many responses. In Cadence, for instance, if someone does respond, it takes them out of that loop. So you're not accidentally going to spam them again, which is kind of neat. But in my experience, sometimes I'll even include that in the template that I'm sending. If I don't hear from you, or if we don't have a chance to connect sooner, I'll check back in a few weeks. So kind of to that last point I just made, if you do send out a big campaign, and you saw some of the numbers I shared, like 300, 700 people, you're going to have to email them again. But then include something interesting. Maybe it's about the industry, like, hey, did you see blah that just launched at CES or whatever, depending on the interesting, but you can't send the same template. Maybe change the subject line. If you already have their first names and last names, you can include their subject line in the title. But ultimately, you're going to have to email them, and maybe it depends industry by industry, more than once, because I don't think you're going to hit the mark with just one shot. That's tough. Yeah, I think doing it in a massive way is kind of this whole spray and pray idea. So I've actually always kind of more been on the other side, where maybe the people that do respond, they're going to end up getting a little bit more of my attention, and I will try to schedule a meeting with them. If I saw they opened it or saw they clicked it, maybe I see lots of clicks, maybe it got forwarded within the team, and I'll end up giving them a little more attention than making sure I re-email all 300. But I think that's super qualitative. Sometimes I don't think there's really a science, and I haven't done the A/B testing to see if following up in a month or in 3 weeks is useful or not.
You can go for it 3 times on cold mails.
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, there's some cases where I've emailed someone 5 or 6 times, and then finally, yeah, they're like, hey, either F off, or they're like, hey, you actually should be talking to so and so. You know what I mean? Any other questions? Oh, sure. Yeah, so good. You have to hang out in this terrible office. Damn. No, any other questions? Yeah, go for it. If you have that list, I think the limit for Gmail is to send like 250 in a day, and then you can't like email your family or something. Yeah, I think he for that scale, which isn't necessarily my expertise, and he was asking, if you do have access to really well qualified leads and big lists, and you really would love to reach out to them, is this tool a good fit for that? And I suggested maybe David has an idea of something that might work.
One called Persist IQ. It's funny because it's persist like persistent, and you can load a lot of cold emails in there, and it works for the time being. So hurry up before they get slower.
And how does it send the emails though?
Through their SMTP.
So it's like sent on behalf of John at blah or whatever.
Make it look like it's your name.
But it's a different server that sends it. Yeah. What
You just create a bunch of fake Gmail accounts.
starts to get really dark really fast.
If you create fake Gmail accounts, yes. If you use Persist IQ, no. This is all recorded, guys.
For me, it's tough, like, because I've been lucky to work at companies that do have a good reputation, they do have a number of inbound leads, they do have a good product, which I think ultimately is kind of the biggest thing here, like whether I'm pitching for PR or for a product or service, like ultimately what you're selling has to be useful. It's kind of like ultimately the bottom of it, So you have to believe in what you're reaching out to people about. So, different tactics might work, but ultimately the proof has to be in the pudding, Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to add some value on people who use Rapportive. Like, I was really bummed out when they only show LinkedIn contacts. So I found a tool. It's called Connect 6.
Mm-hmm.
When you hover above someone's name, they show Twitter profiles and Facebook profiles.
Yeah, I think, and he mentioned, one service that might work better than Rapportive called Connect 6. I'm not. Connect 6? Yeah. Because Rapportive used to or sometimes still does show Twitter and Facebook. Really? Okay, that's why I still see it.
Reach out now. It's the Rapportive Reach Out. It's like the new Rapportive.
So there's another tool called Reach Out. Okay. Yeah, which depending on the market you're selling to, and let me know if we're out of time. If depending on the market you're selling to, like in Germany, like Rapportive or LinkedIn isn't as prevalent. A lot of people are on Zing and they're not even on LinkedIn, so then it doesn't really help you there. You know what I mean? So depending on the region or market that you're selling into, some of these tools work with less effectiveness. If they've used that email address to sign in, yeah. Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. You said Connectify? Yeah, Connectifier. Yeah, that's cool. Any questions? Hey, go ahead. Yeah, this is good. Crowdsourcing right now. Go ahead. No, totally, and I think HubSpot has another version of that I had tried using, but Yesware I installed, and Yesware, I mean, I guess ultimately if you pay for it, they stop. But when it was when it was in my browser, it was like popping up all the time, and I saw the value in that, and you actually you can get notifications when someone opens the email with Cadence as well. But Yesware was just killing it, and to me, and that's probably one of the disclaimers I should have gave, like being an American, I feel like a lot of the things I said, like definitely like American style, and sometimes that doesn't translate linguistically or culturally sometimes. And like Yesware, I felt like their like sales like approach, Like there was just shit was popping up, and I was getting emails, and they like really wanted me to pay for it. And I was like, God damn, like even for me. So I've definitely heard of it. But you know, one of the pieces of feedback I got, even like ending emails with, if we don't have a chance to catch up sooner, if we don't have a chance to connect sooner, I'll follow up in 2 weeks. To me, that sounds kind of benign, but I've heard like to say that in the Netherlands sounds kind of crazy. It's like a little pushy, like to end an email like, if you don't talk to me, I'm going to talk to you in 2 more weeks. And like people are like, oh shit. So I know some of this is kind of tricky. Like you can say it in like a friendly kind of way in American English, but like depending on the industry, it might not be received as gezelligly, you know. Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead.
You mentioned like the subject line of image and the choice of words for this. And you do have like statistics and the choice of how to increase the response rate by choosing what to put in the subject line?
I mean, probably my biggest takeaway, and I'm not an expert on this, is using someone's first name. If you already have that, sometimes it comes also down to like when you send the email. Something I was talking to someone about earlier today is like sending emails on a Sunday evening, which seems kind of counterintuitive. But people are preparing for the work week. They're sitting on their couch like, oh shit, tomorrow's Monday. What do I have to do? And it shows them in their inbox. And if it has a subject line that catches their attention, one of the ones I've used is like, you know, hey, so-and-so would love to learn more about how you do blah, and whether that's development or HR or any of these number of industries I've done sales for, like wanting to learn more about how they do it, and then starting the email with, hey, so-and-so, I understand you're in charge of blah for your company, and like kind of flattering them, and they're like, oh yeah, I am, okay, I am in charge. And like, and then it's like, in my experience, I've found that people in your role struggle with A, B, and C, and they're like, yeah, that is a pain in the ass. And then they kind of keep going, and then it gets to the bottom, it's like, if you'd like to learn more, if you think it might be helpful, would you like to speak? And then there's like the links to like, okay, how about Tuesday in the afternoon? It's never that easy, really. You have to send that a few times, like we just were saying. But yeah, I would say kind of testing that a little bit, but I don't have any conclusive findings yet. Time for one more? Push them up. Yeah, last one.
Sorry, I want to respond to my neighbor here, because everybody's looking for the perfect subject line, but I don't think there is one, and I have a pretty good experience myself, and I've come up with it myself and for somebody else. Just keep it short, so keep it empty.
Yeah.
One, keep it to get an eye open.
Yeah.
Add RE in front of your subject.
This is good. Ooh.
It starts with your email being read, so then he finds out that it's a scam, but they call it.
Then he still loves you. Yeah. Yeah.
It's been opened, and the last one is RE colon and then introduction.
Yeah.
Keep it short, keep it maximum 3.
I think keeping it short, and I could see how the RE actually would be useful. Another one I saw from like a brand I liked, and it totally was like some campaign for me to like buy their bag or whatever. And it said your bag is ready. I was like, oh shit, my bag is ready. And it's like, buy this bag. I'm like, not even my bag, you know. Like, so stuff like that at least gets them to open it, but you have to keep them excited. But yeah, thank you guys for having me. Yeah.